Hello,
Oh, Christine.
my little muffin.
Aw.
How are you
Stud
feeling?
muffin? No? Okay.
Oh, I thought you said step muffin. I was like, sorry, you don't want to be blood related to me. Hello, my
No,
little step stud muffin.
I'll be your little biological muffin.
Yummy.
How am I feeling? Fine.
Mhm.
How are you feeling?
I'm sleepy. I went to a bachelorette party this weekend.
Oh, whose?
My friend Liz, who is my brother's high school friend, and then I moved nearby her in Kentucky, and we became close. And so I went down with Dee, my brother's girlfriend, and we went to Red River Gorge and had this beautiful cabin, and it was really fun.
I was gonna say you look very tan. Was that a product of that?
No, that was a product of a
bottle?
a bottle I found from Australia on Amazon. So, but
Okay.
thank you for noticing.
You're welcome.
There's a hot tub and stuff, so I was like, I guess I should look a little tan.
It worked. You look like you're like sun-kissed, perfectly sun-kissed.
Thank you. I did go hiking one day, and oh boy,
Oh God.
yeah,
How was it?
It was a lot. It was a lot. It wasn't even that long or that strenuous. It was just like at the top there was this natural bridge, and it's like this big platform with like basically plummeting cliffs on both sides. And so of course I always think I don't have a fear of heights until I'm on a height, and then I'm like, oh, I'm fearful right now. I guess
think everyone
that's a
has
fear
a
of heights.
I think everyone has a fear of heights, but everyone has a different height they're afraid
Threshold. Oh yeah,
Like,
because it wasn't even like me. Like it wasn't me being near the edge. It was like anytime someone walked toward the edge, I would like stop breathing and be like, "You need to get away from that right now, because if I watch you die, you're gonna ruin my whole day."
see, I'm not worried about. I thought I wasn't afraid of heights, and then I did a hot air balloon, and I was like, "Oh shit, I'm afraid of heights." That was a bad place to find out you're scared of them.
I said that, and someone was like, "Didn't you go skydiving?" I was like, "Yeah, I vomited all over the floor afterwards." So that
Did
should
you
tell
go
you something.
skydiving? Do I know this
I
about you?
did. I don't know. There's a video on YouTube. Please don't find it. A bunch of people have found it, so you'll probably find it. But there's a video on YouTube.
What? How did you even get yourself into that plane knowing what was going to happen?
It's a great question. As you know well about me now, I'm extremely good at dissociating. So I just kind of said, "Hey,
I can imagine your YouTube video as you just like 1,000-yard stare, just totally dissociating in the sky."
It was, but I was also I knew there was a camera. This is the most me bullshit ever, and so I was trying. They were filming it, so I was like being like funny and like joking, but like looking back, I'm like, I don't remember a second of that. I just like I think that's what I do on stage at shows. I just like leave my body and say, "Good luck. I hope you can figure this out yourself." And then
At least there you can drink wine.
That's exactly true. Yeah, I was not allowed. I was not given any wine on. Although on the natural bridge, I did have a high noon in my backpack, so I did pull that out to kind of comfort myself. But it was like then there were people with their kids who were kind of wandering toward the edge, and I was like, I am seriously going to have a panic attack if any of these kids get too close to the edge. I can't abide by this. But anyway, it was a delightful weekend, and I had wonderful fun. And I'm happy to be back here with you, Em. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. I'm having a bit of I don't know if there's like such a thing as like a flare up for anxiety, but like
sure.
Is there?
I think so, yeah.
I'm going through it right now. This is like the third day in a row where like I'm having some trouble breathing. And so then I'm having anxiety on top of that, being like, this better end before I have to go on tour.
Hang on, maybe you knew I was on that bridge and you were like, oh no.
Maybe. Oh, and I still haven't spiritually recovered.
Maybe my soul visited you and was like, my body's on a bridge over there and she's gonna fall off a cliff, and you're like, oh fuck.
Maybe I did fall and my soul is still free falling, and that's why I'm like feeling so jittery. But but no, my body is not allowing me to like relax for 5 seconds. So I'm a little panicky for fully no reason. For no reason. So I'm kind of
we always have a reason. We always have a reason.
I can't think of one.
We're going back on tour.
I know, but
shockingly,
shockingly,
a lot of projects.
I know we're supposed to be, but that's who we are. Maybe that's what's happening. I'm settling into the fear.
Yeah, your body's like, we're back to our normal routine, our normal bullshit.
Well, anyway, I'm hoping that it'll go away in time to see you and be on stage, because that's just a total fear tactic of mine. Anyway,
if not, our souls can leave our husks behind together and fly away into the sunset holding hands. And Eve will say, come back. And we'll say, no, we can't hear you. Sorry, we're going through a tunnel. Bye.
Well, I will say, before I had this flare, it really should have come. I'm not surprised that it's happened. But for the last week, I forced myself to go on a vacation, because I was supposed to be on vacation anyway. And so since I ended up staying here, I was like, I'm just going to veg the fuck out and actually breathe, because I feel like I haven't breathed in a long time. And
this week is all about me. I'm gonna breathe some oxygen.
That's how sad my life's become, where I'm like, I'm gonna treat myself with a gust of oxygen. And so I made myself not think about anything, and I know in hindsight I'll regret that, but
no, you probably needed it.
I did need it. And so it's interesting that as soon as I let myself get back into work mode, I started having the worst panic attacks I've had in a very long time.
Your body was like, oh, we're back to this bullshit.
Probably.
We had such a nice little reset.
It was so lovely. I've already missed that time, but it was very worth it. So up until, if you asked me how I was 72 hours ago, I would say I'm having the best time. So, come see, come saw. So
that's what we say. Que sera, sera. All those other foreign languages.
Well, Christine, I have a maybe UFO story for you today.
Oh, man.
And this is the abductions of Brian Scott. And this is pretty, I'm going to tell you that it's bananagrams, but I didn't actually really even deep dive into some of it, and I'm just going to warn people now on that, because I found whatever I could in general internet sources, but apparently there are books that have come out about this that go really in depth on some of the details, and I'm telling you now, I did not read those. What
if that was your vacation last week? You just read a bunch of really long books. It's the world's worst vacation for M. Schultz.
Well, I'll also say that these abductions specifically that I'm going to talk about, or this case, the story is a little too wild that I don't know if I would have been able to fully break it down properly. So I honestly, especially because I was in my treat yourself moment, I was like, I know I'm not going to do this justice, so I'm just going to kind of keep it simple.
Okay. I think probably for most of us, this is the first time we're hearing of it. So I think an overview is fine. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
And if anyone's I really want to know the in and out, just, I have the book. They can get the books. Yeah.
Yeah. I have the shout out for that.
It's nearly impossible for us to touch on an entire several books series in one episode.
Yeah. Especially when they're things that, they're apparently about the alien world. It would feel like I was explaining QAnon again. And that
that was my first thought. I was like, that was quite a doozy.
It took a toll.
Yeah, I am on all of us, to be honest. You mostly, but also us.
So anyway, if you want more information, I will shout out the book at the end. But this is what you can find with a simple Google search, and not going any further than that. This is great. And by simple Google search, I did do several hours, to be clear. But if you were to Google it, this is what you'll find. So what's interesting about this case, and this is what drew my little peepers to it, is that this seems to be a UFO case that, based on whatever researcher was studying the case, they came at it from very different lenses. I don't know if this is normal in the paranormal world or in the UFO world, and I just am unaware of this, but this case in particular seemed to announce itself as whoever was studying it could see it as either aliens or a poltergeist or any sort of supernatural thing. It's almost like an overlap of all the worlds.
Oh, okay.
There was one quote that said that this case marries together elements of UFOs, alien contact, poltergeist phenomena, spiritual possession, and everything in between. And I was
everything in between.
Everything runs the gamut, full up.
No big deal.
Yeah. So I was like, oh shit, like I don't think we've ever had a case where ghosts collab with aliens, you know? So
I don't think so, which is kind of wild but exciting.
So this is I think that's another reason why I didn't get into the book, because I feel like it was really heavily leaning into one direction versus another, and it was just I wasn't going to be able to do like a balance. Anyway, so this is Brian Scott's story, and it starts, depending on the source, either when he was 16 or on his actual 16th birthday. So I guess either way, it was his 16th year of life is when we begin. It was the day was October 12th, 1959, and he was walking his dog. This was in Phoenix. The whole story takes place in or around Phoenix. And as he's walking his dog, an orange orb of light, this ball of light about the size of a basketball, hovered over his dog. Just appeared out of nowhere and is hovering over his dog's head.
I don't like that.
I would first think that like someone threw a basketball nearby and it was about to hit my dog in the head.
Stop throwing things at my dog.
Yeah, but apparently it just hovered there. The orb was pretty see-through, and it looked like it was more solid in the center and like kind of faded away the further out you got.
Okay.
And the ball or orb all of a sudden moved towards him and stops right in front of his face. So then again, I would think a basketball is about to hit me in the face. I would fucking duck. I'd go, whoa.
I probably wouldn't. I'd be like, what's that? Bam.
So as Brian looked at it, apparently this flurry of images started running through his head. And as soon as he kind of came to realize that this thing was trying to communicate with him, the orb shot off into the sky, not to be seen for a very long time afterwards. But
dun, dun,
all that
dun.
we really get from that is it was his first real experience with something odd. And he deals with like streaks and orbs of light in the future. So this was his first encounter with this, and he knew it was trying to communicate with them, so he knew it was intelligent.
Okay.
So again, you hear orb, you think ghost, but also images in your head that shoots off into the sky. Could be an alien. We don't know. The next time, so that was in 1959. We don't see anything again until 71. On Pi Day. So March 14th, 1971, he's hiking in the desert of Arizona at, of course, it's called Superstition Mountains. And he's with his friend Nick. And fun fact, Superstition Mountain sounds like a place I should just cover on its own.
Yep.
It is allegedly an underground military base, which I feel like you're hiding in plain sight at that point if you're going to put a base under Superstition Mountain.
Nothing to see here.
You might as well like have like a CIA Area 51 space called like QAnon Street, you know, like something crazy. So anyway, Superstition Mountain has an underground base allegedly. There's also a lot of like bizarre deaths that happen there. People have claimed that supernatural voices show up and speak to them, or that there are like invisible forces that have either appeared to people or will take over somebody, and it will like cause them to like attack the people they're with in the group.
What the fuck?
People get abducted there. Apparently the reptilians who I've talked about, they are said to live in the mountains. So great place to go. I feel like if I had ever had a single minuscule alien encounter, I would just never go to a place called Superstition Mountain.
Yeah, I would just stay inside my home for the rest of my life, I think.
Not that that would help you, but I would feel safer.
Certainly not.
So both allegedly Nick and Brian, they had this weird urge that day to go head in the direction of those mountains without a real plan to have been there. So already feeling compelled by something to be there. And while there, Brian looks up into the sky and he sees an oval-shaped glowing UFO with purple lights in the sky, and it is apparently significantly larger than a normal plane.
Oh boy.
Brian has a gut feeling to run, which, by the way, was not there when a basketball was coming at his face. And this UFO, I guess, I don't know if it was giving him a sense of doom or it could sense that he had a sense of doom. But all of a sudden it hovers over him as he's about to run away. And it was so big once it was hovering over them that Brian says he couldn't even see the sky. They get covered the sky.
Mm-mm.
Which makes me think it was always the size of the sky and just being cloaked in some way, you know?
Ew.
Like, how do you start as something someone sees over here and then just like it zooms in that? You know what I mean? Or maybe it's really fast.
Maybe it just it doesn't use our transportation. You know, like the Tic Tac where it was going so fast and they were like, our technology can't do that.
Yeah, good point. So anyway, he looks up again. All of a sudden, the sky is not there, which is
cool.
I can't imagine a more apocalyptic feeling.
They're like, oh, also on Superstition Mountain, we forgot to mention, but sometimes the sky just goes away. So if you're okay with that, let's go hiking.
Can you imagine talking to someone like me who already doesn't want to go hiking?
Yeah,
and
right?
they're like, no, you don't understand. Sometimes the sun is gone. It's like,
it's fine. It's really not a big deal.
So this thing hovers over them. He says his body tells him to run, but like, where are you going to run if the sky is gone? So all of a sudden he feels a quote, pulsating, pulling feeling go through his body. And soon he's being lifted off the ground.
Oh no.
Next thing he knows, he is on the UFO.
Oh.
Surprisingly, Nick is there too, which I can't imagine. Can you just be like, sup, Nick? Like,
oh, you're here.
It's like, bro, like you didn't get away either. And so they're both, I guess, just fucking chilling on this UFO, and all of a sudden the room begins to fill with fog.
Oh, fuck.
And soon out of the fog walks in very horrifying creatures.
Oh no.
And the fog, interestingly, seems to soak back into their bodies. So I'm wondering, like, did they, like, was it a skin fart? Like, did they fart it out and then they, like, reabsorb it? Or was there, like, a special effects team that they walked in and happened to absorb it for the first time?
Intern have to turn the fog machine on? Or is it, like, actually part of their...
Was one of them, like, shouting into the other room, like, kill the fog, kill the sound machine. Kill the...
Yeah.
But yeah, interestingly, I don't know how it first appeared, if it was originally in their body or not, but it goes into their body. Ah. Okay. And these creatures happen to be 7 feet tall, a cool 7 feet. They have gray reptilian skin similar to a croc or a rhino. And it apparently, on top of its scaly skin, has a thick patch of hide over its torso.
Oh, like its own bulletproof vest?
Isn't hide like thick skin or something? Like rawhide? Yeah.
Yeah, I think hide is like on a rhino or something, like really thick, like.
So maybe it's bulletproof. Maybe it's just weapon proof in general.
Yeah, maybe it's just a safety thing. I don't know.
Sometimes I think about where we should have hide on our body, and like I think armpits is a great candidate. You know.
Well, then how do we sweat?
That's a good question. I will always live in constant fear someone's about to tickle me, even if I'm in a room alone. I'm just like always very aware.
Seriously?
Constantly.
Oh,
constantly.
No. Okay, you can have your hide transferred to your armpits then.
I would give anything to have a constant shield for my armpits. Like
you could make it smell nicer because it wouldn't be like sweating and stuff.
Be trapped in there.
Oh, that's true.
I don't know. It depends on how the hide is placed on me, I guess. But
yeah.
You don't live in that constant anxiety?
No, I don't. I didn't know that you did either, to be honest.
I never announced it because I thought everyone felt that way.
I honestly am thinking like, wow, there's so much I don't know about you. I'm having a little bit of a moment.
Oh, that's really embarrassing.
It's not embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. I have like other weird fears about like my Achilles heel and stuff that I'm sure are just me.
Well, every time you get out of a car, right?
No, not even that.
Really?
I just saw one time in some show, I don't remember which one, when I was younger, like somebody like slicing someone's Achilles heel, and ever since I have like
it was House of Wax, I think.
Oh, I've never seen that, but
well, it happens there too. So
I was gonna say it must have happened in multiple movies in our childhood.
Oh, I always heard about it because my mom was one of those parents who like always warned me that someone was gonna kill me at any moment, and they were like, someone would always be hiding under my car, and they try to like when you step out, they cut your Achilles heel so then
That's fucked up.
Well, that was what my mom used to tell me every day before I got in the car. So
my dad used to tell me that if I had the duvet cover on backwards, I would choke on the buttons in my sleep and die. So I have a deep-seated fear about my sheets being on straight.
That's beyond. That's crazier than my armpit situation. I really do. Like, often I'm like, I think that's why, because I sweat a lot. I'm just like lucky that I really cake on the deodorant, I guess. Like, I'm always tense in my armpits because I'm just waiting. I think maybe it's from my own childhood issues where like my dad thought it was hysterical to just like poke you in the armpit any opportunity he got. And it's like and also in the hip, he would always like poke you in the hip because like the part that gets you, that tickles.
Ew, no.
He just like, I think like to like, it was like a weird like gotcha trick that he thought was hilarious in some dad way.
Tickling can be bad. Like it's not really, I don't promote that for kids. It's not good.
Me either. I don't like it.
Google it, guys. It's not good. But yeah.
Anyway, that's why I have a weird thing about my armpits because I'm just like,
what else are you afraid of?
Okay, wow. So anyway, we're getting back to the thick patch of hide that I wish I had on my like
armpits.
My armpit and my torso, I guess, for getting poked there all the time. So, yeah, there was, and then on top of that, these things had 3 long fingers on each hand that looked like claws.
Nah.
So forget that. Brian then described these creatures, because I guess he already said it's kind of like a crocodile or a rhino based on the skin, but then it's got this weird hide on it, and it has claws. He described it as a combination of earth animals. Which I wonder if the aliens were trying to like figure out something that you could relate to and just throw them all together, you know?
Yes, I wonder that all the time about stuff like this, where there was one story I heard, I think on Astonishing Legends, where he saw like as a kid he saw these aliens as like circus monkeys almost, but then like as he grew up they would like change what they looked like to make him feel like comfortable. Of course it didn't work because he's like, well, now there are circus monkeys in my room, I'm not happy about that. But it was almost like an attempt to make them like relate.
I would be terrified of monkeys for the rest of my life.
Right? Like, me too.
Feel like, are you a monkey or are you a fucking alien? Yeah.
What are you juggling? What's happening?
So Brian described them as a combination of earth animals, and then the beings told Brian and Nick, who's still fucking there, they told them to disrobe. Yikes. And then they were brought to separate rooms. So we don't know what happened to Nick. And now we just know Brian's story, which is that he was taken into his own room. And in this room, there was some technology he was unaware of, where the room itself had a supernatural force to it that was able to hold him against a wall while they examined him. And that's as far as we go there. I don't know what type of exam. I don't really need to know.
Nah.
But in the room, so basically he's not in control of his body. And there is a pole in the middle of the room with a box on it. It feels kind of like a telephone pole. That's kind of how it's coming across to me. And the box on the pole has a laser beam coming out of it.
Sure.
And the beings that were examining him go over to this control box and they shine the laser onto him. And wherever it's hitting his body, Brian can feel warm and cold fluids flowing through him. So he can like the laser, he can like physically feel it going through him, which is
yuck.
When they eventually shined the light in his eyes, he felt instant pain in his head, and then immediately his mind goes numb. So it was almost like it's like a medical procedure of like, oh, we're gonna like it's like we're gonna dilate your eyes, but actually we're going to numb your mind. And after this, a new being walks in. This one is 9 feet tall. And he comes over to Brian and touches Brian's head. Brian immediately feels thousands of thoughts and images getting projected into his head, just like the orb did. And when Brian says, "What do you want?" it telepathically told him, "I will tell you, I will show you."
Oh, I'd be like, never mind. Keep it to yourself.
I just wanted a name. I just wanted like a one basic. Quick word. Yeah. The alien or creature then said, "There will be no more pain of this," and Brian's head pain goes away. So that's nice.
That's good.
And the walls of the room all of a sudden transform a la Smart House into like some sort of like 360 hologram. And Brian now sees himself standing in a space where he can see a land of domed cities So he's like almost seeing, I guess, like he's seeing the skyline of it.
Yeah.
Of domed cities, and they're all through mist. So he's kind of seeing what I imagine is like if you're in a skyscraper and seeing like the tippy tops of buildings.
And everybody's skin farted around, and so there's fog everywhere.
Could you imagine though if people farted and you could at least see the mist, so you knew where to avoid?
Biggest fear unlocked.
It's
besides
one of
choking
them.
on the buttons of my duvet.
This is so wild. Sometimes I've thought, you know how they say animals can see things you can't? I was like, what if they can see farts? You know?
That might be why Gio leaves the room a lot. And I'm like, sorry. He's like, I know what's happening here.
Well, I would like to be able to see them, so I at least knew, like, if I'm getting crop dusted, how far away can I get away without having to deal with this, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
It'd be useful instead of, like, just guessing if my mouth and nose are safe. Anyway, I'm so sorry, everybody,
Gross.
but it is a thought that happens way too often in my head. So he's seeing this land of domed cities. He's in this hologram room and he's seeing a world that he's unaware of. And this being says that what you're looking at is a hologram or a projection of our town, our hometown.
Cute.
And yeah, what do you say? You're like, oh, it's beautiful. Like,
it looks lovely.
Can I go home now?
Yeah.
He also says that even not only is what you're seeing a hologram, but even our identities on board are holograms.
See,
because
you called it.
We are disguising ourselves to you.
Ew.
This is a quote from Brian that says, "The gray bulk of flesh." Okay, could have said it any other way, but
whoa,
the gray, just calling someone a bulk of flesh.
Yeah.
The gray bulk of flesh changed into that, in front of his very eyes, changed into that of a beautiful people with long flowing red hair, deep blue eyes, and a golden bronze complexion. I felt a welcome sensation of peacefulness as a voice began speaking within my mind, and it said to me, "We are the children of the stars from time beyond all time."
Are they Pleiadians?
It sounds like it, right? That word doesn't come up in this, but it sounds like that, right?
Oh, it does. Except I think Pleiadians have a blonde hair, but
Oh, right. Well, maybe it was like colorblind, and didn't just didn't know.
maybe maybe they just went to Walgreens and bought like a box dye and were like, I feel like I'm standing out this week,
They were looking for an Australian bottle of spray that they could throw on themselves before a bachelorette party.
I've got plenty. Come on.
They also said that the reason they appear as gray at first and not as like some beautiful redhead is because they, quote, wear the gray cloak of sorrow, which like that sounds like depression. Just to be clear.
I also wear that, by the way. It's not very comfortable.
We wear the gray cloak of sorrow in remembrance of our past. Sit with us now as tonight your journey begins.
What the fuck?
So it said this, again, projecting a cloak of sorrow. That's how they appear to people. But maybe that hide that we were talking about is involved in this because they said parts of their form that they're disguising themselves with is a shield against other biological agents so they don't get sick from other people they're interacting with.
Okay.
And they told Brian that the homeland he had been looking at in this hologram was what their home world used to look like before a virus came through and killed many of their kind.
Oh, shit. Oh, no.
So that's why they're now wearing the cloak of sorrow to remember their past, and now they have a shield to protect them from biological agents so it doesn't happen again. And then the holographic images of their home world disappears. They're back in the normal UFO room, and now Brian has the ability to move around.
Okay. I also looked it up what Pleiadians look like, and apparently Andromedans have red hair.
One day I'll do an episode where I just list them all. Like, just give
wait.
a directory of like, M's unofficial guide to
M's very unofficial guide.
The Merriam-Webster M definition of every alien. So anyway, so now they explained like, oh, we, where we come from. And the hologram goes away. He can now move. He's not trapped against this force anymore. And he looks up and the creature is walking out of the room. And I guess he was just done with the conversation. And Brian asks who he is. And this is when the creature turns around. I'm imagining very dramatically.
Of course.
And this is apparently, in different sources, this is the moment where he shows himself as a redhead with blue eyes and more human looking than
because the hair has to flip.
Right. That's what I'm imagining too. It's like a Cinderella spin of sorts. And and he says, this creature says, "I lift the veil of projection. I am Voltar."
And then he remembers he was playing a video game this whole time and he accidentally fell asleep and this was all a bad dream. Please tell me that's what happens.
Which, like, by the way, Voltar seems like such a fucking reckless little alien to be like, oh, we have all these like strategies and like protocols to make sure we don't get sick. We have all these disguises. I lift the veil of projection simply because you asked my name, you know.
You knew the secret code.
By the way, I have a picture of Voltar for you, and I want you to imagine this is the one dramatically turning around and lifting the veil of projection.
I am so amped. Oh my god! I love it in the bottom. It's like it almost looks signed, Voltar, in like a handwriting.
So he looks a little. He's giving Hercules, you know.
Ooh,
like,
yeah, a little bit with that headband,
the little headband and red hair. So immediately, it's
he's definitely smizing. You know,
he's truly working it. He's like ready for the runway.
He is.
So anyway, he turns around and says, "I am Voltar," and then continues to dramatically walk out and leave. After Voltar leaves the room, more of the beings come in. I wonder if they are in rhino crocodile form or if they're in Voltar form. I don't know. But they then grab Brian and they escort him to the exit of the UFO, which I like how they're like, your time is done here.
Bye-bye.
Brian gets there, finds Nick. Who knows what Nick just went through?
Poor Nick.
And they both get dressed, which they couldn't do that in their own rooms. Is kind of weird to me. And then they're slowly floated back down to the mountain.
Okay, at least gently.
Yeah, instead of just like yeeted off, you know?
Yeah.
So when they get back to their car, which like they could have at least fucking dropped you off at the car.
That's true. You had to walk back. That's kind of rude, I gotta say.
Can you imagine taking me hiking? I don't even want to fucking be there. Then I get
abducted.
First of all,
I can't imagine you taking you hiking, but anyway, go on.
Then I get abducted, and then I have to hike back down?
Yeah.
No. I've had enough of today.
I've had enough. I've had it up to here.
So when they get back to the car, they realize that 2 hours have passed. And this is super weird. As soon as they get home and off the mountain, Brian notices right away that he is very quickly losing the memories of what had just happened to them, almost as if they were being erased in real time. Very soon, Brian, like within the same day, Brian entirely loses the memory and wouldn't regain it until years later when he got hypnotized.
I was gonna say, I feel like the only way people end up getting those back is under hypnosis.
Well, so during hypnosis, he discovers that this was the first event of many where he then is later abducted several other times through 1975.
Oh, no.
After one of these encounters, that's when Brian started experiencing paranormal phenomena in his house.
Oh, no.
So now we're like, okay, that was obviously an alien situation, and now we've got some ghost stuff.
It's unlocked a new realm or something.
So I was going to say this at the end, but you're kind of already hitting it.
Oops.
That one of the theories is that, I mean, a lot of people are coming at this as clearly, assuming this is not mental illness, clearly this is an alien experience, but then all of a sudden all this weird ghost shit starts happening. So are ghosts aliens? Are aliens ghosts? Are they distant relatives of each other? Do people that have alien experiences ends up having more paranormal stuff simply because any and all things are attracted to the like elevated energy levels near you? So like it becomes this whole conversation for investigators on like where is the line between supernatural things and like how do they work together and do they know of each other? And
oh, that is so interesting. And then you wonder, like, is it because you've accessed a certain realm that now like you just have that open door? Like how when you've talked about people who die on the table and like come back, they've kind of unlocked some sort of access.
Isn't it wild?
Yeah.
Or like even people like with what's it when they can like remember things from past lives because they're so young, like they're still so close to that side, or like you know, so
they're still kind of tethered to that other side. Ooh.
So that's the whole like fascinating part of this case, is that every investigator came at it from a different perspective and they all had different theories of what it could mean. So
oh my gosh.
So anyway, that was the first encounter, but now he's having paranormal stuff happen in his house, mainly that he is noticing a lot of random lights through his house. So he's having streaks of light, balls of light, flashes of light that are so bright that they would blind everybody in the house and then just randomly disappear. Where this is super weird, but I've actually had a blinding ball of light show up and then disappear.
What? Tell me.
It wasn't at my house. It was with my friend Brandy, and it was the weirdest thing in the whole world. It was not my ghost. I think it was the ghost in her house that did not follow me home. It was a fly.
Or is it?
It's saying, shut up, shut up.
It's like, I'm here.
So, my friend Brandy, she had something that it didn't show up a lot in her house, but it happened enough that in high school she would talk about it sometimes, that she would see this like white apparition or kind of this glow that would show up in her house every now and then. And she was telling me about it late one night and in her house. And I said something like, oh, well, that's gotta be good. At the time in my mind, I don't know if this is still true, but I believed at the time and still kind of believe it, that if you're seeing a bright light, you're probably safe, versus like if you see something dark, maybe it's more ominous. But that was kind of I don't know, the way I went about things at the time. And I was like, oh, well, you know, that's probably really good. At least if it's a light glow that you're seeing, maybe it wants you to feel safe. And as I was saying that, I can't explain this. I cannot explain this. And I have talked to Brandy about this multiple times throughout the years to be like, did that fucking happen? But out of nowhere, as I'm explaining it, my hands, you know, I talk with my hands. I remember freezing in time, not of like time froze. Like I remember my hands being stuck like this and me looking around, like my eyes could move, but I remember seeing my body frozen. What we were watching on TV was frozen. Brandy was frozen. Everything was frozen. I was stuck in time.
Oh my
all
God.
of a sudden, out of in the other room comes this glowing ball of white, like a perfect circle of bright white energy, floats through her house and like floats right in between the two of us, and then like pulsates and grows until it's like it's covering the entire room.
What?
Fully bright white light. It like explodes in front of us, completely gone, and everything went back into working. Like the TV was on, we were able to move.
Did she see it too?
Yeah, and I was like, what the fuck was that? And she was just like, I don't know, that was fucking weird.
And had that ever happened before when she saw it, or was this the first time it like froze time?
That was the first time. But
that is terrifying.
As far as I know, it's never happened again, but it was so freaky. It was probably the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me. Like
it must feel like surreal.
I still think I had to have been dreaming or something, but it was as I was saying, oh, well, maybe if it's a light color, it wants you to know that you're safe and it's nice. And that's when it happens. So
oh my God.
So I was like, okay, well, that's a good thing to like show up during.
Yeah, did you feel like it was confirming that then?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
but
amazing.
Can you imagine if, as I was saying that, a really fucking dark figure froze time? That'd be, oh my God.
That is, it was like, you speak of me. Yeah. That is so wild, Em.
It was bananas. So, wow. Tangent time. Sorry about that.
No, that was very relevant.
Yeah. Well, so this guy is seeing balls and flashes of light that blind you and then disappear, which I can say I've experienced.
Been there.
And there have been a few, apparently there were a few people who ended up reporting also seeing this around him. And there were random items that would show up through his house. There's one quote from an interview where he said, a rather odd brown-shaped thing That's vague.
Yeah.
A brown-shaped thing has from time to time shown up in the house. It dashes around the room in crazy directions, and every time that it does, it creates some damage to the home. All the electricity and circuits in the house have melted, frozen, and burned up.
It sounds like a flying squirrel got in the chimney, but I guess maybe it was not.
It sounds like something really obnoxious.
It's just like a pest.
So then his wife, here's the other weird paranormal thing. His wife starts acting weird.
Oh, no.
Having fainting spells. She starts mumbling noises and nonsense. Like he can't understand what she's saying. She apparently starts going into trances where she's acting out of character. In one interview that he had, Brian said that one time she felt like she felt like it. I didn't totally understand, but either she felt like it or was truly convinced that there were hands all over her body and she was being grabbed and assaulted by these hands.
Oh, God.
Going further, he said, it was as if from her description, she was describing the aliens I had seen aboard the craft in 1971 had visited her. This is odd because she has never seen any of the sketches I made of those entities. So I don't know if she was actually seeing them and describing them to him or if she was feeling herself be examined like he had been.
Oh, yuck.
I don't know which one it is. Later that night, he was looking for her in the house and couldn't find her. And this was after she'd already said she didn't feel good. She felt like she was being grabbed. And Brian heard something in the bathroom. So he went to go check and see what was going on. He found her in there, and this is what he had to say. This is kind of a long quote, but it's, worth it. My wife was on the floor, hyperventilating. I got her up and onto a chair in the living room. I was on my way to call her mother when she just fell flat on her face. I called the paramedics, and while they were on their way, she got up and fell down again. Then she began to become hysterical. It took 4 paramedics to hold her down. She was throwing people around as if they were tissue paper. Men were thrown backward against the furniture. Finally, they loaded her up into the ambulance.
Holy shit, that sounds like a freaking possession. Like an exorcism almost.
Yeah. And as this was happening, all of a sudden, he goes to the playpen to make sure that their 1-year-old is doing okay. Fucking missing.
No, what?
They end up finding the baby very quickly on the patio, but this baby was way too young to be able to break out of its own playpen.
Right.
And so one of the things that they had been experiencing up until this point was that objects moved by themselves in the home. And now all of a sudden their baby is moving by itself in the home.
It's like, that's not an object. Stop it, guys.
Yeah, that's a whole new level.
That doesn't count. Yeah.
But how creepy that objects could move by themselves, and now on the night where it's really showing its power, it's literally like, oh, and by the way, I can also do this.
Yeah,
just
forget it.
Further terrify you. In the house after this night, they kept hearing voices in random rooms that were in random languages, so they didn't even know what it was saying. More objects moved on their own, and they were able to see apparitions, although some say they were aliens, because these beings they could see were bald, big-eyed humanoid creatures.
Ew.
Which could be an apparition, could be something coming back to visit you.
Sounds like an alien to me.
And during all of this, Brian decided that he was going to do hypnotic regression. And during this is super creepy, he starts speaking in a voice that is not his. It is mechanical, computerized, and I'm assuming very Microsoft Sam-ish.
Terrible.
This voice he called the host.
Oh! Sorry, that really took me by surprise. That's terrible. Oh, that gives me goose cam. Oh, no.
I guess when the doctors doing the hypnosis were like, what's your name? And they said the host. And Brian was able to channel the host many times after this. So one of the other voices that would speak, this was just one of the voices that spoke through Brian. The other one was named Ashtar. Which it's unclear if this was of the UFO world or paranormal, or again, could be like some sort of mental health issue because
sure.
I don't know if he was aware of the terminology, but people with DID, dissociative identity disorder, the host is is like a common word used.
Great point. I didn't even put that together.
So I don't think that's the case, but I do want to mention like that's a weird coincidence. But so one of the other voices that are coming through is named Ashtar. And this is a quote about the host in Ashtar. The voice seems to come out of me, an inner voice that is not mine. The entity says that I am one with it. When asked if it has a name, it will just come back and say, I am, I am. The other night, we heard the same strange sounds coming from the bedroom. I began to speak in a foreign language that we later found out was Greek. Where that came from, I don't know. I wrote in Greek backwards, too. On top of that, I was writing with my left hand, and I am right-handed. The voice was talking. We asked who it was, and the name Ashtar came out. Then it began to use the name Ashtar and speak to my wife. It told her things about her past that only she could know. Then it went on to say it would give her all the money in the world. It only wanted one thing in return, her soul.
Here, can I say something? Because when you said I am, it brought me back to the beautiful, lovely, idyllic days of my Catholic school education.
Say it, because it's what's coming next. Say
oh,
it.
Damn. Okay.
Say it.
Sorry to insert
say
myself, but yeah, I am is like a identifier for God. Like it's like a name for God in the Old Testament, I think.
Bingo,
and
Christine.
the New Testament. Yeah.
And apparently Ashtar is very similar to Ishtar, which is like it's like one source said a Babylonian goddess, and the other one said was like one of the like consorts for one of the demons or something.
Okay.
It seemed like
weird.
Seemed like there was a lot of different ways to connect it religiously.
Yes, definitely.
So,
and like also side note, back to the mental health thing, like there are so many instances where people with like severe mental health issues like connect it to religion. And I'm not saying that's what's happening, but it's an interesting parallel at least.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a note from investigators who have said the master Ashtar, this is a quote, the master Ashtar appears in much of UFO contactee literature. One cannot help noting the ancient origin of the name Ashtar, described always as a god of evil and negativity in the Bible. There are instances where those who claim to have been forcefully taken aboard of UFOs describe an interaction with beings who represent themselves as emissaries of Ashtar's grand plan.
Oh, God. That's overwhelming.
So, and that's an excerpt out of the Dragon's Lair. So researchers looked into these voices because they were like, this guy, what the fuck is he talking about? And
seriously.
Like, and what character has he, conjured up? But so they decided to look at the voices themselves because they always sounded weirdly computerized and mechanical. So they wanted to make sure he wasn't just altering his voice and this was some elaborate hoax. And it was determined that the voices, quote, produced an exact 1,000 cycles per second on an oscillography, which should have been impossible for human vocal cords. The voice lacked all harmonics and seemed to be nothing but a series of small ripples, and the voice print was different than Brian's, which he claimed would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, to fake. He being a researcher.
God.
Plus, each of the voices coming out of Brian were completely different in terms of their own analysis. So all these voices are not him, or seemingly not him.
Shit.
Most of the time, though, even though these voices were coming through and talking, it is mentioned often that they weren't really like quality conversations. Like they were just kind of saying really simple things. But it is interesting how often the voices would show up. They just wouldn't really say anything super in depth. But the host in Ashtar would speak through Brian, often telling him what was coming or what was expected of him. And Brian was also able to do automatic writings to learn more information about them.
He's like, I'm writing, but it's in Greek and it's backwards, so.
Yes.
Oh, I was joking. Oh, no.
So weirdly, these writings would sometimes be in ancient languages he did not know, or he would draw very advanced scientific diagrams he wouldn't have known how to do. And Brian would then explain that the entities had, quote, tasked him with the mission to master quantum displacement physics and begin to develop a mind transference machine to unite all of humanity. Like, what a tall order.
I was going to say no pressure.
It's like, you had me at quantum, just the word quantum.
Right? I don't think any of this. No.
So another time the host talked to Brian, it told him that he had to go to Bolivia for further answers. But he apparently, when he came back from Bolivia, he actually came back very different. He had like a weird new heightened level of intelligence. He was weirdly a lot calmer. He was no longer a chain smoker. Like his whole behavior was different. And then apparently that did not last because either after this or around this time, he ends up being abducted again, and we find out that he's being abducted by multiple groups of aliens. So that's a whole other level to this, where it's like apparently he was being abducted by those, the redheaded
group, right?
The first group. Then he was abducted by a group of Greys. Then he was abducted by a rival group of Greys, like it's the fucking Newsies. Like I don't like.
No.
So now it's like, well, do all these beings have some? Because if they're trying to get him to create this machine of mind transference to unite all of humanity,
right?
Do they already have this mind transference thing where they all know about him if one group has abducted him?
Or have they like kind of put a beacon on him almost by abducting him? And now, you know what I mean? Ugh.
Like, why are all these beings able to find him, or why do they all want him so badly? Or do all of these, is there like some sort of, United Nations where all of them know like he's the one that's going to build this for us, and so we're all keeping tabs on him or something?
This is all bad for him.
Very creepy. At some point during these investigations, or people just researching him and studying him, during this time, every member of Brian's family has at least been hospitalized or experienced one traumatic event. So it's almost like something saying stay away. And then at some point he meets this guy, Jim Fraser, who wanted to write a book on Brian's case. And I think they became friends over the years. And he was like, oh, I want to write about you, but I wish I had some more evidence about your story. A different source said that he was actually going to help Brian get to Bolivia, but he wanted more proof first before he embarked on this.
Yeah.
But he wanted some sort of proof of Brian actually being abducted by aliens. So eventually, he says this out loud of I want some evidence. And then at 2 a.m. the next morning, Brian starts speaking in the voice of the host, and he says, "Now comes a ball of fire for all of mankind to see." And then literally gives coordinates to look out for. And then within 24 hours later, this massive ball of fire that was reportedly seen by so many people,
oh my God,
literally showed up in the sky, and parts of it landed. The biggest part of the meteor landed in the coordinates that Brian gave.
Oh my, yeah. Be careful asking for proof. You might regret it. It might backfire.
Yeah. So when Jim and Brian went to go look for this meteorite, they ended up hearing a bunch of weird electronic beeping out on their search together. And when they came back, this led to Brian now having weird telepathy and mind reading powers.
Oh my God, it never ends for this guy.
It never ends. In 1976, so about a year later, Brian was abducted again and talked with the host. And this instance was apparently the start to the play of life.
Huh?
This is what the host told him. This is the play of life.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And you're the star, baby.
Yeah, I didn't ask. I don't remember auditioning for this.
So this is where I also get confused a lot, because it seems like the host is a voice that goes through him, that he's talking through. But anytime he's been abducted, it sounds like the host gave him directions of where to go, and then he would get abducted. And during these abductions is when he would see Voltar again.
Okay.
So it seems like Voltar is at the abductions, but when he's alone getting instructions, it's from the host.
Right. Okay.
That's how it's kind of coming off. So the host told him, oh, this is the play of life. And eventually when he gets abducted again, Voltar shows up and says the play of life would end in 40 years of that date. And the next phase after the play of life, which they don't fucking even tell you what the play of life is. Like, is that, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't have much patience for people who talk in these kind of riddles. And I'm like, you're making me extremely frustrated and making me feel stupid. So,
like, at this point, Voltar might as well be like a troll under a bridge. And, like, you have to, like, answer his riddles 3 to to cross.
I know. I'm like, I don't have time for this. There's only 40 years left.
Well, interesting. There was also a note that 40 years is a biblical generation.
That's right. I didn't even put that together.
Well, so Voltar says, welcome to the play of life. It will end in 40 years. And the next phase after that is the return of the last UFO, which is like interesting because didn't Star Wars just come out around this time and the Return of the Jedi was like a thing?
Listen, I don't know. What year was that, by the way? I'm
76.
And it's been 40 years by now.
It's been 40 years, yeah.
And I was going to say we're okay, but I guess we're not. So maybe that tells you something.
We're currently dealing with the return of the last UFO Jedi, I think. So they said when at the end of these 40 years and when we're at the return of the last UFO, Brian would be a light to all of mankind.
Oh.
That was kind of like the last real message he got that I was able to find online. I don't know if there's more in the book, but other than that, there's not much left we can do but speculate, and a lot of UFO enthusiasts and experts have studied his case. One of the main researchers into the story and one of the interviews that I got a lot of my quotes from was from a researcher named Tim Green Beckley, and he was one of the people who came at it from a paranormal perspective. He said that the voices, the entities, the occurrences in the house, they could all be paranormal, supernatural, or both. And all of them could be, the reason they're all happening at once is because they're all attracted, quote, to the location due to the extreme vibrations already caused by Scott's ongoing cosmic encounters.
Okay. So it's like all these encounters are building this, like a beacon almost. Like now these other aliens are attracted
spiraling
to him. Yeah. Ugh.
Some believe that this is evidence that the paranormal and the UFO worlds overlap in some way we don't understand. That maybe aliens gave him the supernatural gifts, in which case are they able to tap into things? There's also the thought that if they're able to see our worlds, can they also see our afterworld, our other worlds? Like at what point do dimensions of time and space stop overlapping, and how capable are they of seeing these things? Reactions to Brian's case are very mixed. Some people think this is real. Some people think it's a hoax. Some people think this is severe mental illness.
Sure.
And Jim Fraser, the guy that became his friend through this, who was researching him, he wrote the main book that I did see excerpts on, and I thought about including them in these notes. It was called Transformation of a Common Man, the Brian Scott Story. And I say I thought about putting excerpts in, but honestly, it was like, now that we've finished, I can say more that like the excerpts I saw were basically like reading fucking calculus, because it was so in depth with like the alien world that he had been researching.
Oh, geez.
And it was like, it talked about like the play of life and then things that Brian needed to do. And he was having visions of like bombs in the world. And like, if he didn't go to Bolivia, then there was going to be a bomb that exploded somewhere. And it comes off a little too mental illnessy for me at first glance, that I didn't want to totally promote that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't read the book. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but the vibe I was getting was like, maybe I'm just so out of the UFO worlds that it just didn't register as like fully comprehensible to me. I don't.
Yeah. I understand.
It just seemed like a lot. So I was like, maybe I don't say this stuff, and if you want to read about it, you can. So
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, out of context, especially with excerpts, it can be hard. So
yeah. But anyway, that is Brian Scott.
I've never even heard, and Nick. He's like always the friend, never the abductee. Well, I guess he got abducted too. Do we know what he's up to now?
One source said that he was still kicking it. One source said that he is not. So I don't really know what's going on with him.
Oh, jeez.
But he survived the play of life, I guess. So there's that.
That is so. What year was 40 years? Do you know? What?
It was 2011. So minus 40 would have been 51. Oh, it was saying, because so he got that like prophecy in 56, and it was saying since your first abduction, which was I think in 71.
Gotcha.
So you've been enduring the play of life since you started speaking with us, essentially.
Me too. That's what I say about M. I'm like, I keep enduring the play of life, aka talking to M.
And that's why you're projected in a cloak of shadows or whatever it is.
That's why I live under the shadow cloak. Yeah, whatever. It's called seasonal affective disorder in my mind, but whatever. It goes by many names.
But anyway, I think the thing that really just grabbed me is I'm sure you could do it with every single alien story I've ever covered, but the fact that they were mentioning, at least in this, like, what are the connections to the paranormal world with the alien world? Like, I've never even really sat down with that before. So
it's a big question because it feels divided. Like, it feels like cryptids, aliens, and ghosts are all kind of their own thing.
Mm-hmm. And it feels like a lot of people will even say like, oh, I believe in aliens, but I don't believe in ghosts. Or
exactly.
Like it's weird that they could all just be of the same world, which in my mind, I believe in both. I don't know about many cryptids I believe in, but they could all be the same thing. I mean, a lot of people think that Mothman is an alien, right? So
some people think Sasquatch is real, but aliens are not, or vice versa, or ghosts, but not Bigfoot. You know, I listen on Astonishing Legends. They get made fun of a lot for saying everything is connected, but I think it is in its own way. You know,
I think if you're gonna believe in one thing that doesn't have a lot of backing, you can believe.
You might as well just dive in.
keep at least keep an open mind at that point.
Yeah,
you know?
I think an open mind is the best way to put it. Yeah. Wow, Em, good story.
Thank you.
So I have a story for you today. This is the story of Angie Dodge, and I hadn't heard this one before. It has a couple twists and turns. So buckle up, if you will, if you don't mind.
Hang on.
Whoa. It sounded like you were loading a gun, but I guess...
hang on. Okay, hang on. Rewind. Hang on. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Click.
Okay, that's better.
Okay, I'm buckled in.
Well, you're just too good at the Foley, you know?
That's me.
That's you. So, Angie Dodge. Her family moved to Idaho Falls in 1984, which was a tight-knit majority Mormon community where everyone kind of seemed to know everyone. And Angie was the youngest of 4, and she had 3 older brothers. And when she was born, her dad was so excited to have a daughter that he skipped into the hospital, like in glee, which I think is so sweet. According to Angie's mom, Angie came into this world with many talents. She was always busy. She was bubbly, intelligent, responsible, and independent. And a friend described her as wanting everything out of life. But, of course, the happiness can't last in my story. So,
never has, never will.
Never has, never will. So on June 13th, 1996, Angie was tragically murdered in her tiny top-floor apartment where she had only lived for 3 weeks.
Oh, shit. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty dark. So she had moved in after a disagreement with her mom about a house rule because she had just turned 18. So she and her mom had an argument about like living under her roof. So she had moved into this, new apartment and was only living there a couple weeks. But the day before she died, she actually went back home to see her mom. And her mom, Carol, said, the night that she came over, I rocked her and I said, I'm so glad you're not mad at me anymore. And she just looked up and said, not even in a blue moon.
Oh my God.
I know, I'm going to cry. But of course, the next night, several friends had come and gone from her place. And after 12:30 a.m., nobody heard from Angie again. On the next morning, when Angie didn't show up for work, her coworkers thought it was so out of character for her that they actually left work and drove to her apartment to check on her. They found her door ajar, and they found Angie dead in her bedroom.
I feel like if I ever saw a door open to a place, just immediate, it's not good.
I'm not going in there. I'm going to get somebody who's more capable to go in there.
Yeah, I'm not
I won't even allow anyone I know to go in there. I'd be like, no, call somebody who is equipped for this kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So police arrived and they found a brutal scene. Angie had been stabbed multiple times and her throat had been cut. The murderer then sexually assaulted her body, leaving behind semen.
Oh my God.
And Detective Ken Brown, who was on the scene, remembers there was a lot of anger, a lot of humiliation involved in this crime. So horribly, oh gosh, my heart. A little bit later, Angie's mom called Angie's work to invite her out to lunch.
Oh God. She has no idea.
She had no idea. And police hadn't contacted her yet because it was, just a couple hours later. And so one of Angie's coworkers was on the phone and heard her mom say, like, hey, I was wondering if Angie could come to lunch with me. And the coworker didn't know what to say. So she said, Angie's been found dead. You need to go to the police station.
Yeah, what do you say?
I know. Like, how do you get through? Like, obviously the other person's going to know something is terribly wrong. Like,
even if you say, I think you need to hang up and call the police right now. Like,
yes.
like that's so much worse. Like,
that's almost like, yeah, exactly. At that point, you might as well just say, hey, look, this is what happened. Ugh.
That poor coworker is probably like, I just wish I never picked up the fucking phone.
Honestly,
but then like, when would the mom have found out? Like,
right,
ugh.
Exactly, and someone else would have picked up the phone. So it's like, oof, it's just a losing situation. So of course, Carol was in total shock. The whole town was in shock. Idaho Falls averaged 0 to 1 murders per year. So this is like, especially something this brutal, was just unheard of. And then especially the fear of knowing that the killer is out there somewhere,
Yeah.
Angie's funeral was a crowded event, but afterward, and this is the part that I think about a lot when I watch true crime shows, her mom felt like the world had left her behind. She said, everyone went on with their lives except me. I would look outside and say, these people, don't they realize my daughter has been killed? And
yeah,
I know that feeling on a much smaller level of like, if you're going through grief or like trauma and you sort of look around and you're like, does nobody care?
Continuing.
Yeah, the world goes on, and it's like, of course it does, but it just feels like such a personal, isolating attack. Like, don't you know how horrible things are falling apart?
Especially because, I know all of us either have or will one day have to have that feeling hit us. And it's, but to know that it was also like a brutal attack on someone you love just feels like a whole additional layer to it.
Absolutely.
Of like, not only did the world move on and they probably thought like, oh, well, everyone deals with death or whatever,
Platitude.
a lack of empathy you could have. But to know on top of it, like my experience was particularly gruesome and people still moved on. And it has to be even more of a lonely feeling.
But the part of it too is like, there's no choice. Like, people have to move on. Like, it's not, it's like your world is just like shattered, but people have to go to work and live their lives. And it's like, no matter what happens, things just keep on rolling. It's just a really hard thing to
swallow.
To swallow, yeah. So police quickly ruled out Angie's closest acquaintances, like her boyfriend and the friends that were at her apartment that night, who were all the last ones to see her alive. And the way they did this is that all of them, had alibis, but the police had the semen sample, and this was obviously very compelling DNA evidence. And so everyone, boyfriend, any male friends that were there, gave DNA samples to exonerate themselves and to aid the investigation. So all of them were cleared. Pretty quickly, investigators kind of ran out of suspects, and Carol began to, of course, just replay over and over, the last few days before the murder, trying to think, like, is there anything she said to me that could be a clue?
Yeah.
And so she remembered Angie telling her, Mom, I did something really stupid, but then kind of, shut it down and refused to say anything else. And Carol didn't want to like push her and thought, oh, well, it must not be important. And of course now is like kicking herself thinking, I wish I had begged for more information. So Carol also thought maybe Angie had fallen in with a bad crowd, or maybe, had gotten in between two people who had a conflict. But either way, Angie spent a lot of summer days hanging out at a place called the Snake River. And this is where most teenagers and young adults were spending their time, especially during the summer. And she had a tight circle of friends there, one of whom police were especially interested in. So this guy's name was Chris Tapp, and he had encountered one of the detectives on the case before. So he kind of had a personal connection with one of the officers. Detective Furman worked at the school that Chris went to growing up, and since Chris had been in trouble a few times for like behavioral issues, he kind of already had a relationship with this cop.
Knew each other well.
yeah. Maybe not like on the best of terms, but, you know, they're aware of one another.
I understand.
So Angie and his other friends knew Chris had struggled with addiction in the past, and they were trying to be kind of his support system. One friend described, he was just so lighthearted, such a dedicated friend. We liked the guy, so we kept him. He needed some good friends to take care of him. So Chris eagerly agreed to help with the investigation, along with all of Angie's other friends. They all answered questions. They provided alibis, submitted DNA tests, and like I said, none of them were a match. Carol, Angie's mother, went to the police station every single day, but there was just never any new updates. And it seemed like investigators had hit a dead end. So the way Carol described it is, quote, "The anger just surged through me, and that's when I just went to the streets and put 60,000 miles on my truck looking for the murderer."
Oof.
So she's sort of like vigilante justice now, you know, like looking for who this could be.
Doing whatever she can, yeah.
Yeah, she decided to take it into her own hands and launched her own investigation. She decided to pursue any information she could find about her daughter's death. You know, she was really struggling to find anything. But then one of Angie's friends was arrested in Nevada for raping a woman at knife point.
Oh, geez.
And they were like, well, that's a good fucking clue.
Yeah.
So Ben Hobbs was his name, and he had been so close with Angie, actually, that he carried flowers at her funeral. Like, he was part of the funeral. So now he suddenly became the prime suspect in her killing. While in custody for the Nevada rape, Ben said he would fully cooperate in the murder investigation, and he told detectives, "Honest to God, I had nothing to do with the murder of Angie Dodge. I wouldn't kill my friends." Then he asked,
you would do some other stuff, right?
yeah, I would kill someone else, or I would rape someone else at knife point, but not a friend, you know?
Yeah.
Then he asked, was she raped the night she was killed? Because if she was, my DNA will prove my innocence right there. And he was right. The DNA at the scene did not match to Ben.
Oh, okay.
But it was still a very odd similarity that, you know, he was so close to Angie and then had been arrested for this other similar crime.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, with no physical evidence, they needed a confession. So they brought Ben Hobbs, Chris Tapp, and a third friend, Jeremy, in for questioning. And all three men were adamant that they had nothing to do with the murder. And police at this point are like, okay, we're going to separate these guys, these friends, and try to get them to flip on one another. Like, they're thinking that several of these guys were somehow involved since they were all such close friends. So police are trying to get the men to turn on each other. They're offering promises and plea deals. And Jeremy and Ben are just holding their ground and talking back to police like, no, I didn't fucking do this. Like, you can say whatever you want and promise me whatever you want, but like, I had nothing to do with this. Chris, on the other hand, seemed a little more vulnerable. So he told Detective Furman that he trusted him since he had grown up respecting this man as an authority at school.
Mm-hmm.
And so at home, when Chris's mom expressed concern about like how much this detective was kind of bothering him and like questioning him, he told his mom, he's my friend. Like, he's not going to, basically, like, he's not going to do anything bad to me or like trick me.
Like, we've grown up together at this point.
Yeah. Like, he knows me from childhood. This guy is not going to, I mean, little did he know this cop was convinced that he did it. So,
yeah,
you know, he was a little too trusting, I guess, in this authority figure. So, as I just kind of hinted at, Detective Furman was not actually Chris's friend like Chris thought. He was determined to find Angie's killer, and he had become convinced that Chris and his friends were involved, despite a lack of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when police developed a new theory, that Ben and Chris had indeed been involved with Angie's murder, but Jeremy was not. Instead, an unknown third man was there, and that's whose DNA they had.
Interesting.
So, yeah, they're now basically saying Ben and Chris were involved with the killing, but the person who raped her and that DNA was from a third party we have not yet identified.
I can't imagine like having to investigate a case and thinking you're looking for one person and then it's fucking 3 and you're like, oh my God, it just got so much harder.
You're like, wait. This is so convoluted.
It's like, oh my God. Yeah. You just want everything to be so simple.
Just, yeah, like wrapped up in a nice little bow.
Mm-hmm.
So on February 7th, 1997, Chris was charged with rape and first-degree murder with a deadly weapon based solely on a confession. Chris did, in fact, confess to being an accessory to Angie's murder. He had allegedly held her arms down while another man attacked Angie, and at one point, they passed him the knife and he cut her just once on the chest. So when the case went to trial, Chris's mom remembers thinking, what in the world have you gotten yourself into, and how in the world am I going to get you out of this mess? And there was no way of getting out of it. So Carol Dodge, this is Angie's mom, didn't understand why they were convicting someone with no physical evidence, but the police just kept telling her, he confessed, Carol, he confessed. Like, what more do you need? He confessed to this crime.
Okay.
The judge did acknowledge... The judge did acknowledge the lack of evidence and said, with no confession, there would not have been a conviction for this crime. And with no evidence and no confession from Ben, Chris was the only one who could be charged with Angie's murder. So on March 28th, 1998, Chris was found guilty of the crime. And at the sentencing, he pleaded for life in prison instead of the death penalty. He told the judge, my death would be another tragic loss for another family. I am not the monster or animal that everyone thinks I am. So he did indeed get life in prison for the murder and another 20 years for the rape. And so this means he wouldn't be eligible for parole for 30 years.
Oof.
So yeah, it's a doozy. So when court adjourned and Angie's family passed by Chris's broken-hearted mom, Angie's brother said, Carol died twice. I hope you're happy you still have your son because I don't have my sister. So basically like salt in the wound to the mom whose son just went away for life.
Yeah.
After the trial, Carol said, I was finally looking somebody in the eyes who I thought was the devil that had taken my daughter's life. Well, as you kind of already guessed, the story's not quite over because even though Chris was behind bars, one of Angie's killers was still at large, supposedly, since they thought it was like a mystery man out there. And Carol was like, listen, fine, we've got this one guy behind bars, but if there really is another killer out there, like I want him in jail. I want to find him. So
also, am I missing something? But I feel like if Chris were going to plead for life in prison, I feel like if he had the bargaining chip of like, I know the other guy.
True.
I feel like he would have just been like, I'll tell you the other guy if we can like get my sentence lowered.
Okay, well, hold on to that thought.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me check my seatbelt. Oh yeah. Oh, that sounds like a gun again. Hang on. What's the sound when like you get locked and you can't move the seatbelt?
Oh, it's like
that one.
It's like click. I don't know. I'm clearly not very good at sound effects.
I'm trying to think. All I hear is me being so frustrated.
It's like,
and then
that sound.
Hang on.
And it's
click,
like
click. And then
it's me going, God damn it.
Yeah. It's
I'm
just
usually
me
just
frustrated.
swearing and going, ugh.
All right. Well, I'm still buckled in, so we're good. And I've readjusted.
Thank God. Okay.
Yeah.
Airbags are ready just in case. Okay. So let me find my spot.
You giving the mic a little kissy?
Yes.
Look at you.
Sometimes Moonshine carries this foam part around the house, so I should probably not put my mouth on it.
Ooh, does it smell like cat breath?
No, he just likes to carry stuff around and then put it in his water bowl and drown it. So
that's so foul.
Yeah, well. Okay, so like I said, Angie is now on the hunt for this final mystery person. And so she went to police and requested copies of all the videotapes recorded during Chris Tapp's interrogations. And she's kind of looking at these tapes and she basically wants to watch them and see if there are any clues as to who this person could be that helped Chris commit this crime. Investigators had recorded nearly 100% of the interrogations, and they gave Carol all the tapes. And that's when things started to take a weird turn, because in court, the prosecution had chosen select tapes to show the jury, which made Chris look guilty without a shadow of a doubt. But when Carol started watching them from start to finish, she got a funny feeling. and she began to see a different story playing out.
Hmm.
At the beginning of the tapes, Chris was adamant that he knew nothing about Angie's death, but the detectives just refused to accept that, and then they started to feed him information. So Carol was a little confused, and she wanted answers. So, she decided to reach out to a professional. And so this was over a decade after Angie's death that she reached out to the famous DNA scientist, Dr. Greg Hampikian, who worked for the Innocence Project. So in a wild twist of fate, Dr. Hampikian had already taken on Chris Tapp's case recently for the Innocence Project. So he was already working on Chris Tapp's case when Angie's mom reached out to him.
Oh, okay.
Chris Tapp had appealed his conviction several times from prison and was insisting he was innocent. So now Dr. Hampikian and a public defender named John had agreed to represent him. Dr. Hampikian told Carol he was working to free the man convicted for her daughter's murder. And she said, I just want to know what happened to my daughter. She's like, I'm not, my mission isn't necessarily to keep that guy in jail. I just want the truth of what happened.
I just want information and closure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly. She told Chris's team to please review these interrogation tapes she had gotten from the police because she felt like something wasn't right. They did, and they were stunned. Detectives subjected Chris to 9 interviews and 6 polygraph tests, adding up to over 40 hours of questioning, most of which his lawyer did not attend. His lawyer was not present for most of this questioning.
Ooh.
He told Detective Furman, who, again, he considered a friend and an authority figure that he looked up to and respected and felt safe around. He told him that he trusted him and wished he could help. And Detective Furman started playing what Carol calls the hypothetical game, where they would feed Chris scenarios and try to get him to agree, hypothetically.
Gross. And because his lawyer wasn't there, There's no...
He was just vulnerable in that position. So here's a transcript from that quote-unquote game, okay? I'll read both Detective Furman and Chris. What if you did, okay? Cut her once. Okay, so you cut her once, Chris. I know I didn't cut her, okay? So you got a hold of the knife. No. He passed the knife off to you, obviously, okay? And it's all right, Chris. I didn't take it, okay? Damn. So hypothetically, if Chris Tapp was holding on to Angie as she was being cut and some of the other stuff was going on and Chris Tapp took part of that in any way, shape, or form in cutting her, okay? But I didn't. Would you listen to me? Chris, sorry. Detective, okay. Hypothetically, I said, if you took part in any of that, that's okay because you're still here. You're still showing some good faith that you want to cooperate. So this is like how the whole thing went. It was like so manipulative.
Very baity.
Yes, it was. It was like they were like luring him into this like weird hypothetical world where like it was so gaslighting. It was like anytime he said, but I wasn't there. And they're like, I said hypothetically, are you listening to me?
Yeah.
It's really gross. And so of course they're all watching this going, uh-oh, this is not okay. So detectives told Chris in the tapes that they could offer him immunity and that anything he said that incriminated himself would be tossed out as long as he helped bring in Angie's other killers. So remember when you said, oh, didn't he have a bargaining chip?
Yep.
Apparently he did, and they just fooled him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they were hoping that Jeremy, Chris, and Ben might all implicate each other. But Carol said Ben and Jeremy were much smarter. And Chris, what I realized, because Detective Furman was a school cop, Chris trusted him. He kept saying, you've got to trust me, Chris. Just trust me. Chris was taught to follow adults, and he was a follower. So he really is just trying to do the right thing and just try. Remember that show, Making a Murderer? Mm-hmm. Did you ever watch that?
No.
Okay, so I remember that being like one of the first. I think it was like when I was living in Glendale, and it was like one of the first like true crime docuseries that like became like a huge hit. And I remember watching it and being like mind blown. It was basically about how, false confessions and how people who might have like a lower IQ or like,
yeah. I do think
like,
maybe I watched this.
I feel like it was so long ago now. It's hard to remember, but
his sister became a lawyer to be able to help him or something.
That sounds right. I don't really remember, but that could very well be.
Okay. It's been so long, but I do remember that being like the first like blockbuster hit of a true crime documentary, I remember.
And to be honest, I don't remember like the outcome of all that, but I clearly remember feeling like, oh, it was so obviously him. Like, who says they did it when they didn't do it? Like, that's ridiculous. And then you watch it and you're like, oh shit, you can see how somebody could be manipulated and like just totally gaslit into confessing something they didn't do. And so I think it really seems like a more common thing than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
So basically that's what she's saying. Like, he just wants to cooperate. He just wants, he genuinely trusts this guy, this cop. And so he was just used as a pawn and put behind bars.
Yeah.
So the detective started telling Chris details that only the killer should know, like details about how brutal the stabbing was, what Angie was wearing, and where she lived, because Chris didn't know any of those details. So they would like ask him, where does she live? And he'd go, I actually have no idea. But then they would start feeding it to him and then he would like know the information. And imagine 40 hours go by and you're like, yeah, she lives here. And they're like, so you do know where she is? And it's like, well, you told me, you know.
Oh my God, that's the most like, it's like such an abusive, toxic. It's so bad.
It's so scary. And especially because they have such authority. Like it's so unsettling. So on camera, detectives asked Chris questions about the killing, and Chris started making vague guesses. Like, he just wants to pass this quote unquote like test they're giving him.
And go home, yeah.
Yes. And and that's the other thing. That's a good point, Em. I feel like a lot of times in these scenarios, they're saying like, okay, after this, you can have a soda or you can go to bed, you can go home. And like, all you want to do is get out of there, you know?
Also, isn't there like a rule of like you can only hold someone for so many hours or something? So maybe they were just...
If they're not if they're not like arrested for a crime, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So on camera, detectives ask Chris about the killing, and he's making these vague guesses, clearly trying to please them to keep this immunity deal. And when he got every guess wrong, from what Angie was wearing to what room she died in, the police would correct him and be like, you mean she was wearing this? And he was like, yeah. You know, you mean she died in this room? It's
so
just...
I thank God Carol, the mom, said like, you guys should rewatch this because something feels off. But also I feel like anyone watching that should have been able to like notice some alarms go off of like, this is fucking weird. Like,
yep.
But I'm glad she stood up for him and like said something.
Especially when she really thought he killed her daughter at first, you know? Like, that must be really hard to like 180 and backtrack on that.
Yeah.
So during the polygraph test, Detective Steve Finn would come in between questioning and tell Chris he failed the polygraph, so they knew he was lying. Like, they were just making shit up. They were like, you know, we know you're lying to us. We can tell based on this polygraph. So scared, Chris would change his story again. And then they told Chris, you have a very strong reaction to the name Angie Dodge. And Chris said, I'm scared. And the detective said, I'd be scared too. Murder is murder. It's like, I mean, part of me thinks like they really just convinced themselves this is our guy. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like, we're not going to second guess ourselves.
Or could they have been like, they just, I mean, I don't know, but I have a general initial distrust with the whole world. Like, could they have just been like wanting to find someone to lock up so they could be done with it? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think like part of it probably is like, we want to solve this case and we have this guy on the hook and he's done criminal stuff in the past, or he's gotten into trouble. Yeah. And it's sort of like, I think they just kind of convinced themselves like, well, this must be our guy, so let's just wrap it up and put him in jail.
Okay.
I don't know the motive or anything, but I don't know. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but the detective told Chris the polygraph was picking up on lies because Chris subconsciously remembered being at the crime scene. And on camera, Chris said, if I was there, I'd remember it, wouldn't I? Wouldn't I remember it? That's my thing. I don't remember it. And the detective said, there's no doubt in my mind right now. You were in the apartment. And Chris said, I would remember that. Anyone would. And Steve says, on the charts, it's saying to me you were there, which is a polygraph test. And detective said, subconsciously you remember, but you don't want to. You don't want to admit you remember. And Chris said, I wasn't there. And they said, seeing someone go off like that. And he said, I wasn't there. And they said, would just be horrible. And he said, I wasn't there, you know. And the detectives say, I'm not saying you were. I'm like, okay, but you literally are. But okay.
But like so clearly you are, yeah.
That's the opposite, yeah. The detectives say, I'm not saying you were. And Chris says, you're trying to put me there. And detectives say, no, I'm not saying you were. It's like, just run around, you know, it's just circling. It's nonsense. So in the end, Chris had been exhausted, coached, and manipulated into finally reluctantly confessing that he cut Angie once and held her arms down while another man raped and murdered her. Police told Chris if he could give them that man's name, his immunity deal would hold up and he would be exonerated. So in another polygraph test, detectives asked him to name the man. And detectives had previously suggested to Chris that the man was his friend, Jeremy. Chris said he knew they wanted him to name Jeremy, so he just picked that name. And he said it as if asking if it was the right answer. Like, I don't know, Jeremy? ? And police told him the polygraph said he was finally telling the truth, and they praised him like he passed a test.
Gross.
Yeah. So only minutes later, Chris started backtracking on accusing Jeremy, but it was too late. So detectives used this quote unquote tip to get DNA from Jeremy. But guess what? There was no fucking match to the semen. And so they said, Chris, you told us Jeremy was there. Now we find out you're screwing with us. And he's like, no, I didn't. It's just so infuriating to read. And like, I just wish his lawyer had been there, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. Especially, I mean, to say like, I don't know, Jeremy, and to say, oh, now like, that's where I'm wondering about, like, maybe they didn't have any bad motives, but if they were so convinced that they were blind to evidence of saying like, oh, well, the polygraph says that you passed, but like, it sounds like no matter what they were going to say it passed, even if it clearly didn't pass, they would have excused it.
I think they just were using that as an excuse to like try to get the right answers. Well, I mean, the right, like the ones they wanted to hear.
The story they'd already decided on. Yeah.
Precisely. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that lawyer needed to be there. Oof.
It's just too bad. So after all this, after this Jeremy thing, they get the DNA results. It's not Jeremy. They tell Chris his immunity deal was off because he lied to them. And Chris was stunned because now he's backed into a corner where they said, you're not going to get in trouble for anything you say. And now they say, well, you lied to us, so actually you are going to get in trouble for everything you've said. Oh. So the police were the ones who suggested Jeremy was present. Chris had only agreed after they convinced him his memory was unreliable and that he couldn't trust himself. And he said at this point, can I just go back to the beginning? I was never there. I was never involved. But of course, now it's too late because they have all this on tape. Mm-hmm. Despite the absolute lack of evidence, they also charged Jeremy with accessory to a felony. The charges were eventually dropped, but Jeremy's name became linked to this murder, and it basically ruined his life. Like, he had to move out of town, and he was only implicated at all because the police were, like, feeding this information to Chris, who then spat it back at them. So even though Jeremy never went to prison for this, like, it followed him, and he had to leave town and try to start fresh somewhere else. So it really just wrecked his life. So the Innocence Project learned that there was more DNA evidence at the scene that investigators had never tested, and those were pubic hairs. So they had these analyzed, and the pubic hairs matched the semen. And Carol said, when they have DNA not once but twice that belongs to the same person and it's not Chris Tapp, the one who's in prison, something is wrong. The DNA scientist said someone went in and committed a typical I hate that it says typical, but that's what the quote is, a typical violent rape murder and left typical evidence on the victim that pointed to an identity, an actual single person. They have a perfect profile, but it wasn't Chris. So now fully convinced of Chris's innocence, Carol went public in a Dateline interview in 2012 where she publicly demanded Chris's release.
Shit.
Now she's like championing for him to get out of prison.
Good for her, though.
It's amazing. It's amazing strength. And, you know, she was saying at the courthouse that she was looking into the eyes of the devil who killed her daughter. And now she's like, you know what? I was wrong. And
it's wild how your brain can tell you, like, to think you're truly looking at a full-blown demon of a human being and then to be able to change is.
Then a few years later being like on TV saying, you know, this man is innocent and his family deserves to have him back home.
Yeah.
It's quite a turnaround. So on the Dateline episode, she demanded, let him go. It's the only thing his mother has. It's her only child. Let him go. So Carol started working with the public defender that had been assigned to Chris's case, and she also reached out to an expert in false confessions whose name was Steve Drizzen. And Steve said, I don't get calls from the victim's family members, and I was just so impressed by her. Here she was actually standing up for a new trial for the man who had been convicted for murdering her daughter. So this is just really, she's a strong lady. He said, when looking at the tapes, that it was, and again, this guy is the expert on false confessions. He said it was the worst confession he had ever evaluated. And it became the confession, that has got to mean something. And he said it was a confession that kept him up at night. He said it was a textbook case of psychological coercion. And he said, this isn't Chris's confession. This is Jared Furman's fantasy of how this crime occurred. And there's no evidence. Not only is Chris locked up for a crime he didn't commit, but the man who did kill Angie Dodge is still out there. So it's like a lose-lose, because an innocent man's in jail. The one who did it is still roaming free. Nobody got real justice. Like, it's all just bad. So another nonprofit got involved, and they're called Judges for Justice, and they reviewed the investigation and published reports from polygraph experts and retired FBI agents who all agreed the investigation was flawed. So the report stated, they manipulated Mr. Tapp through a series of explicit threats and promises, used false evidence, a host of leading questions, and continually contaminated the interrogation by disclosing non-public details of the crime scene. So they also called for him to be freed. Chris's friend Jeremy had always been angry at Chris for implicating him in the crime, understandably.
Sure.
But when he finally got to see the interrogation videos for himself in 2016, he actually forgave his friend.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
Yeah, which I'm sure was also a hard situation to go through. He told Dateline, they just took it too far. They broke his brain. You can just see him crumbling. It's just so sad.
That's such a sad imagery of it, too.
It is. DNA evidence had vastly improved by now, like over the years that this had been going on. So once again, evidence was sent for advanced testing, including touch DNA, which I think is so incredible. It's basically like skin cells that are left behind just by touching like an item or a doorknob or what have you. And so this time, DNA matching the semen was everywhere, all over the apartment. The killer had left skin cells and other DNA evidence all over the room. But with that in mind, they also found no DNA evidence to suggest that anyone else was present. It looked like there was just one killer. And since it wasn't Chris, well.
So what was the so why didn't they do touch evidence before?
So it had been years and technology had advanced so far that they could do that. But back in the 90s, it just wasn't on the table. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. If something happens to me, make sure they do that shit.
The touch evidence.
Yeah.
I will.
Okay.
I'll go on Dateline.
Okay.
So despite all this new information, Idaho still refused to consider a retrial for Chris. I know. It's infuriating. It's just like all this red tape and stuff makes me crazy because it's like in front of everyone's face, but they just don't take that step.
When it's that obvious, too. There have been some, like, not a good frame of reference, but I've watched a lot of Law & Order SVU.
Yeah.
And there have been some episodes where, like, they know the person's innocent and just, like, still won't let him leave jail. And I'm like, how does that fucking work? Like, what are you talking about?
It's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, my God. So it's the fact that that's real. I just keep hoping that's, like, a Hollywood.
It's upsetting. Yeah. It's very upsetting. It's like, you know. It's just like too many hoops to jump through sometimes, or like people need to sign off on it, and like if one person refuses, then it just doesn't go anywhere, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So a former criminal investigator of Idaho was hired to review the entire investigation, and after 14 months and $36,000 in September 2016, he said the confessions were tainted, questionable, or unlikely, but this still didn't acquit Chris. So the review admitted there was no evidence Chris was present, but he still believed he was somehow present, was where they landed. So Carol was outraged, and her response was, I don't know how he's there, but he's there. You paid $36,000 for someone to say that? Science excludes Chris Tapp, which I love that. She's like, fucking science says.
She was like, I'm going to be a shark about this. Like,
yes.
Let's be clear here.
Let's be fucking clear and stop fucking around over there, faffing around.
And good for her. Like, why is someone in there on a hunch that, like, nobody else has a hunch on?
That, like, 0 people have proof of, and that he's now saying, I wasn't there, you know?
Yeah.
So finally, thank God, a new judge looked over the case, and on March 22nd, 2017, the judge oversaw a resentencing. Chris's murder conviction would remain, but the rape conviction was dropped, and he would be able to get out of prison immediately. So Chris's lawyer tried to talk Chris out of it, but Chris at this point would do anything to be out of prison, even if it meant legally remaining a convicted murderer. He was like, I don't care anymore. Just put that on my name and let me out of here.
Yeah, he's like, whatever it takes.
Yeah, which is also not fair, you know? Like, now you have to live the rest of your life this way. So Carol Dodge took the stand in Chris's defense, and Chris cried as she spoke. And when he was freed, Chris fell into both the arms of his own mother and Carol.
Oh,
and the three of them held each other and cried.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. That's rough.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Chris's old friend Jeremy, that he had implicated, walked up and held him too as they both cried and said, I love you.
Oh my God, it's like a movie.
I know. I have goose cam. Chris stepped out of the courthouse to applause from the crowd that was waiting outside. He said, I want to see what life has to offer and prove that I'm worth something. Then he thanked Carol for being his loudest voice, and he said now that his story was over, it was time to find justice for Angie. He said, I have to honor Angie. I have to stand up for Angie. Detectives continued to insist that they knew Chris Tapp was guilty.
Are you fucking kidding me?
I know. I know.
Oh my God. Yawn.
Yawn. Old news. Get out of here. Go home.
Find a new story. Take a hike.
Take a fucking hike.
Take a hike on Superstition Mountain. You know what I'm saying?
Take a hike to the bridge, the natural bridge on Superstition Mountain.
Take a hike to Voltar's Riddle Me 3 bridge.
Oh, and stay there. So detectives continued to insist he was guilty and that the interrogation tapes would prove it. But in November 2018, Carol Dodge contacted a famous genetic genealogist named C.C. Moore. And C.C. Moore used genealogy DNA from databases like Ancestry.com to narrow down potential relatives of the murder. And this is, the kind of thing we've all seen with the Golden State Killer and just being able to link family trees via DNA to find, cold case killers, that kind of thing. So they did this, and in the end, police were led to a man named Brian L. Drips Sr., who lived across state, but when they looked into it, he, at the time of Angie's murder, had lived across the street from her. And he also happened to have moved away shortly after her death. So investigators matched the crime scene DNA to one of Brian's discarded cigarettes, and pretty much immediately upon bringing him in, he folded and admitted it. He said he had been high on coke that night and really drunk, and he intended to rape Angie but not murder her. They said he kind of slumps a little bit. He was silent for a couple of minutes, and then he just said, I did it. I raped her, and apparently I killed her. The case was finally closed. So in June of 2021, Brian was found guilty of Angie's rape and murder and sentenced to life in prison. And at the sentencing, one of Angie's brothers said, Chris Tapp should be given the opportunity to voice his nightmare to this court. He served and lost 20 years of his life because of Mr. Drips.
It's also, there's no right way for it to have gone, but it's still so infuriating, I'm sure for Chris, but even for me, like someone who's hearing this for the first time, that he went through all of that like mental torture. Then he went through 20 years of prison when this guy came in and within 5 minutes, like didn't need any twisting, didn't need any bending. He was it's me. Like it would have taken 5 minutes of police work. If he just walked in, if they found him first.
I know. And it's like so frustrating because like he was never even on anyone's radar because he just moved away and stayed low profile. So I mean, and understandably, they looked at her friends first because it's like, of course, usually if you're
Yeah.
raped and killed, it's by someone you know. Like that's, so I understand the like initial interest in these people, but it's like when the evidence is not lining up and the person's saying they didn't do it, like it's worth looking a little broader and considering other avenues. I don't know.
It would have taken 5 minutes for a conviction, like had they just found him first, which like I get why things happened the way they did and like who they were looking for first. But the fact that this guy had to lose so much of his life because this guy just never got found. And then like it really is just so angering that like how quickly he folded. Like
yeah.
Like you'd think you've been in hiding this whole time, you would at least put up a fight or something. Either way it would be bad. There's no good way, but it just feels worse.
It's almost like after those 20 years, he was just waiting for them to figure it out. Like, I wonder if he knew that the other guy got let out. Like, I wonder if he followed it or not. It's obviously, I don't know, but because like, as soon as they find my DNA, like, there's no talking your way out of it. Like, your semen is there, explain yourself, so yeah. It is heartbreaking to think about how quickly it could have
been resolved.
Gone a different direction.
Yeah.
So Chris has been fully exonerated, thankfully, and he filed a lawsuit against the city of Idaho Falls and 7 former police officers. Detective Furman, who had meanwhile been elected mayor, actually died in 2022 at the age of 60.
Mayor.
Yeah. Following an early onset Alzheimer's diagnosis. So Carol Dodge is credited with solving her daughter's murder because she refused to give up. And quite frankly, if she had never gone and gotten those tapes, like he would just probably still be in prison and nobody would have even found the actual guy. So Carol said she couldn't back down because of this is I'm gonna cry. Okay. I've got this. Carol said she couldn't back down because of that day she hugged Angie after their argument. She said, if I hadn't had the opportunity to hold Angie in my arms that night and to tell her how much I love her, I don't know that I could have made it. It's what kept me determined to find out why my daughter was killed.
Jeez.
So that is the story of Angie Dodge and the false confession.
Well, there's no happy ending to that story, but at least, the happiest version of it could happen, that at least he got out.
At least there was some justice with him, at the very least.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
it's a doozy.
Good story. Definitely had the twists and turns. I'll unbuckle now.
Yeah, you can unbuckle. We're safely parked.
Click. So it's a good one. I do like when there's twists and turns to the story, and I do like when there's whatever version of a happy ending,
some sort of
possible.
Justice. Yeah. And shout out to the Innocence Project because they really do great work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How did you hear about this one? Was there any?
It was just kind of a random. Like I hadn't actually heard about it before. And the person who helps us do some of our research was like, "Hey, have you heard of this?" And I was like, "God, no." Every time I see a topic where I'm like, "How do I not know that?" You know what I mean? But it's just kind of terrible because there's just so many crime stories that it's like, wow, it's just endless stories to cover, which is, I'd give up my job if it meant no more stories to cover.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're going to have a lifetime of stories.
Yeah, it's too bad. It really is tragic. So I actually had not heard of it before they kind of sent it my way, but yeah,
gotcha.
Pretty crazy.
Well, I'm glad we got to hang out a little bit. I know it's when we're talking about dark stuff instead of just like friend hangouts, but I'm glad we got to see each other. I haven't seen you. We kind of
do that during friend hangouts too. So
I haven't seen you in a while though. Last time I saw you, I was covered in spots. So
I know. Are you feeling better?
I have like a little scarring, but I think after like a couple skin sheds will be good.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
So I think it'll, but it's like they're tiny little dots. It adds character. They're like forehead freckles. So
they're like freckles. Aww.
Yeah, little freckles. But other than that, I'm good. Allison, I think maybe caught a minor case of it, but it was nothing compared to what my situation was. But yeah, everything's my hands are the only thing that are still healing a little bit, but we're in the clear, folks.
Oh, what a week.
Hey, now apparently since I've gotten it and I can never get it again, you've at least helped me out next time I'm near a baby. I don't have to wonder.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'm going to see you tomorrow or Wednesday because we're going to be in Florida this week.
Yeah, I'm going to see you Wednesday in Florida. I'm so excited. And we're about to also record our after chat for Patreon. So if you guys want to hear more, you can go to patreon.com/ and that's why we drink, I think. And that's why we drink. Let me check if that's correct. Nope.
Wow. 6 years, folks.
Cool. Okay. Patreon.com/ ATWWD podcast. So check us out. We'll see you there. Otherwise, I guess we're good to go, huh?
Yeah. And
that's
why
we
drink.